From meeting and working with 3 presidents as mayor, to cliffhangers about floods, famous people, near disasters, and encounters with a ton of interesting characters, this is Tales from the Gem City with former Mayor Chuck Scholz. Join us for this reoccurring bonus segment. I'm History A Go-Go's host, Rob Mellon. Welcome back, Chuck, with more Tales from the Gem City. And over the years, several presidents and presidential candidates have come through the city, and you've met and worked with many of them. Since this is a campaign season, I thought it was a really good time to talk about it. Are there any particular stories that stand out?
Well, my first involvement was in 1980, which of course was the year that Jimmy Carter sought re-election and was defeated by Ronald Reagan. I was a Carter guy, and most of my friends in politics and mentors, people like Paul Simon and Dick Durbin, were Kennedy people. And that opened up an opportunity for me. I really liked Jimmy Carter. And in 1975, as a recent graduate of Georgetown University, I showed up at Mercer University's Walter F. George School of Law in Macon, Georgia. So in 1975, Carter was just starting to run for president. He could only serve one term in those days. Maybe it's still that way, as Georgia governor, and he'd been governor from 70 to 74. So he was campaigning full time. The biggest thing in Macon, Georgia, Rob, in 1975 was the Allman Brothers. And Phil Walden, who owned
it's probably still big down there.
Oh my God. You know, the studio is there on Cotton Avenue, and yeah, it's a shrine nowadays. But in those days, we had this federal financing of presidential elections where you could do, if I gave $50 to Jimmy Carter, it was eligible to be matched by $50. Well, Phil Walden, this record producer, is friends with this young Georgia governor who was kind of trying to be the new South, and he had Bob Dylan at the governor's mansion in Atlanta and so forth. So he held a series of concerts from the Allman Brothers. So you pay your $10 to go hear the Allman Brothers. That's a $10 contribution to Carter for president that gets matched by the federal government. So they were key to his early fundraising success and financed his Iowa operation, which is where he broke through. So I knew all about Jimmy Carter from living in Georgia. And in 1980, at 26 years of age, I got slated with the Carter delegates in the 20th Congressional District, running against my friends Paul Simon and Dick Durbin, who were Kennedy delegates. And I won. And I didn't win because anybody knew who Chuck Scholz was, but it would say Charles W. Scholz, parenthesis, Carter, close parenthesis, on the ballot. So you were voting, you were pledged to that person. So I got elected because in this more conservative part of Illinois, Carter won the delegate slate. And it was important because when we got to New York City for the convention that summer, we were bound to vote on the first ballot for whoever we were pledged to when we ran. And if that was the case, Carter was going to get nominated on the first ballot. He had enough delegates. So Kennedy's people launched this campaign to change the rules. They called it the robot rule, where you had to vote like a robot automatically for whomever you were pledged to, even though circumstances had changed and it looked now like Carter was not that viable and Kennedy perhaps could win. So the biggest vote at the 1980 convention, which was at Madison Square Garden in New York City, was whether or not to change the rule. And they put a lot of pressure on people to try to get them to change. They were unsuccessful, though, and Carter got nominated. But the night before Carter accepted his nomination, Teddy Kennedy gave a speech which is now known as one of the great speeches in American political history. And I was there and witnessed it. And even though I was a Carter guy, I was on top of my seat cheering like all the other Carter people, because Kennedy summed up what we felt like it meant to be a Democrat. And it was his last hurrah. And he got a 25-minute standing ovation. It was incredible, the feeling there. And it was a real letdown the next night then for Carter. But because of my experience on the delegate slate, I was the Carter guy over here. So initially, we had a little fundraiser at my mom and dad's house with Chip Carter, President Carter's son, great guy. And significantly that night, I arranged to have him meet with some city officials, because at that time the city, back when the Motorola building first became empty, they had gotten Cummins Engine from Columbus, Indiana, to agree to take that space. And they got a big grant from the federal government, an Urban Development Action Grant. And unfortunately, Cummins pulled out. So the issue was, can we keep that money and use it for economic development? And his staff had said, if you put it on one page, he'll get it into the president's chief of staff. So we did that, and he met with Jack Madden, who was an alderman from Quincy and a great guy. And we were able to use that money, and it still revolves. It went into a revolving loan fund. So anyway, the big event for 1980 was Rosalynn Carter, First Lady, wonderful lady. They're going to bring her to Quincy. And we strategized about where would be the best venue. At that time, there was a lot of talk about Reagan Democrats, Rob, the traditional, often Catholic, blue-collar Democrat that was attracted to Ronald Reagan and his message. And so we initially thought, go to Quincy Notre Dame High School. That'd be a big thing for a high school to host the First Lady. Well, in those days, the board consisted of the parish priest in Quincy, who one particular priest, ultra-conservative, vetoed that idea right away and said, no, because of abortion. Well, Rosalynn Carter was not for abortion. I've never met any politicians really that were, but she personally opposed, didn't think that you could legislate that, but would work to reduce abortions with promotion of adoption, or, trying to prevent teenage pregnancies, that sort of thing. But that wasn't good enough for this particular priest. So I said, we're not going to Notre Dame. I don't want a controversy. And we settled on Quincy Mall. Turned out to be the perfect place for it. They covered up that fountain court area, and that became a stage. And then building the crowd became much easier, because in those days, there would already be a built-in crowd at the mall, and then you get all your friendly political supporters and bring in the senior citizens. There's a whole art to this crowd building, Rob, and they had a great turnout that day, and it really went well, but not in the general election for President Carter. However, I am a great admirer, and I have two stories about meeting President Carter. The first was, as a delegate, he came to Springfield, which was part of our congressional district. So we all went over, the whole slate, and stood in line at the National Guard base, which is part of Abraham Lincoln Airport over there. And here comes that big, beautiful airplane, pulls up, and they open the door, and you see the seal, and we know we're going to meet the president. So I knew it'd only be maybe a minute at most, but I had a little thing prepared I wanted to say to him. And Rob, he's working his way down the Vince DiMuzio, state senator from Carlinville, was right next to me, and then he's talking to Vince, and he said, well, great, I appreciate your support, Senator. He turns to me and says, Chuck, how's everything in Quincy? Rosen and I love that when we came through on the Delta Queen. And then before I get a word out, boom, he's on to the next person. And I'm thinking, what was that? How did he know my name was Chuck? I was ready to introduce myself. Well, and Carter had, in fact, not set foot in Quincy, but they did come through on the Delta Queen through our lock and dam. But what I found out later was Carter had this clever advanced technique, Rob, where he had a 3-ring binder that he had in the plane, and they had lined us up in a particular order, and now I know why. So he leafed through that binder, and he saw Senator DiMuzio's picture, and he's the state senator, and he's one of your delegates. The next guy is this young guy, Scholz, with the beard from Quincy. And he would memorize those. Just met us, then he's right in the limo, and he's headed downtown to the Hilton. And, of course, he's probably got another 3-ring binder for whoever he's going to meet down there. But it was very clever. And believe me, when the President of the United States turns to you and disarmingly says, Chuck, how's everything in Quincy? You just, he got the intended effect. So I had one other meeting with President Carter, and that was just a few years ago. My wife and I were vacationing down south, and we were driving. And I said, Jimmy Carter is still doing Sunday school, like every other Sunday in Plains, Georgia. Incredible. Here's this, brilliant Nobel Prize winner doing Sunday school in Plains, Georgia. So I called the Plains visitors folks, and they said, yep, he's doing it this Sunday, and told me what I had to do. So you can't stay in Plains. There's no place to stay. But we stayed in America and got up early. There's about 5 churches in Plains, and 4 of them are just these big, beautiful old frame buildings, and none of those was the right one. I asked at the gas station. They said, well, it's right next door. And it was a little 1-story brick church, very humble, but nice. And you go through quite a bit of security, actually, to get in there. But once you're in there, there's maybe 30 people. Jimmy and Rosalind come out. Jimmy gives 1 hour of Sunday school, which in this case was a really learned treatise on the Middle East, all with biblical underpinnings, but brought back to the home situation. And then, if you want to meet Jimmy and Rosalind, you have to sit through the regular Sunday morning Baptist service, which we did, and that was fine. And then you go out on the lawn of the church, and they're very gracious, of course. And I explained that I was a delegate for him back in 1980 in Quincy, Illinois, and all that, and he was just as nice as he could be.
We're Democrats, and we've had our differences. But we share a bright vision of America's future, a vision of a good life for all our people, a vision of a secure nation, a just society, a peaceful world, a strong America, confident and proud and united.
Quite a guy, and I've always admired him, and I think he has been a great ex-president. I think it's a fair argument about the effectiveness of his presidency, but certainly what he's done post-presidency is incredible. But I think our city's namesake, John Quincy Adams, still exceeds it. Carter's been a great ex-president, but John Quincy Adams was the greatest ex-president. Also questionable his effectiveness in his 4 years in office, but to get beaten by Jackson in 28 and go back and run and serve in the House of Representatives for 17 years as a former president, son of a former president, is really incredible. And of course, he was the great voice for abolition.
Yeah, no question.
And the defender of the slaves on the Amistad and so forth. So anyway, we didn't get on here to talk about John Quincy Adams. That's another podcast. So that was Carter. In 84, much bigger deal with Fritz Mondale. It was 10 days before the election, and Mondale wants to do his speech for rural America, his speech on farm policy.
Had you met Mondale before that?
I had met Mondale, had been here in 82.
Okay.
Speaking on behalf of Dick Durbin, who was running for his first term in the House against our incumbent Paul Finley. So just like Nixon after 1960 went around the country helping local races, building up chits, that's what Mondale was doing. You know, they got beat for re-election in 80. So he gets out on the hustings and he comes to Quincy, Illinois to campaign for this young candidate who did get elected to Congress. And that's the only contact I'd had with Mondale. But I knew some of the folks that were working for him, and I said, I'll set you up on a perfect farm. I called Buzz and Rosie Neisen, live out by Burton. You know, Rob, if you had all the Neisens to vote for you in Adams County, you'd be pretty well on your way to carrying the county. And they were wonderful people and good Democrats. And they said, oh, yeah, sure, we'll host him. So the plan was that they would come in the night before, and this would be a first thing in the morning deal. And we were planning to accommodate the whole thing. You know, it wasn't just Mondale, it's the traveling press corps. So there's 2 727s that are going to sit down out at Baldwin Field. I was Democratic chairman in those days, and we had a headquarters called the Truman Club on 5th Street. And for some reason, Rob, I was down there. The Say's going to land about 7 o'clock that night, and it's about 6, and everybody else has left headquarters. They locked the doors, and for some reason, they built bathrooms into what used to be one big open space. And I went in there to use the bathroom, and while I locked the door, no one else was in the building. But when I went to unlock the door, I couldn't get it to unlock. And I twisted it, and it came off in my hand. And I realized I'm stuck in this bathroom on 5th Street. There's no one in the building. There's no one going to be in the building till tomorrow. This is before cell phones. You know, I was totally trapped. And by the way, one of the candidates to be the next leader of the free world is going to land at the airport in about 50 minutes, and here I am stuck in the loo. So I tried to do some Chuck Norris, not real effective, Rob, on the kicks. And I figured the only way I get out of here is to climb up over push out this drop ceiling and climb over the wall that was built when they put in these bathrooms. And I could not, it had some cheap masonite paneling that was too slick. I had on leather-soled shoes, so I took my shoes and socks off, got enough traction to climb up, push out the ceiling tile, go over the edge, get out, get the door unlocked, drive home to pick up my wife to go to the airport, who noticed that I'm in a nice suit and tie, but I have bare feet. And I tried to explain my shoes and socks are locked in the bathroom at headquarters. But in any event, I got shod and headed to the airport where my friend Dick Durbin, who's now in his first term in the House of Representatives, wanted to land and greet Vice President Mondale as well. And he called the fixed base operation out there, and he said, "Hey, our landing gear light on the control panel is out. We're about to land, but we don't know if our landing gear is down or not." And what they had to do, Rob, was keep buzzing us there at the fixed base operation at Baldwin Field to fly low enough that we could visually see if their landing gear was down or not. And I thought it was down, but hey, do I want to be the guy to say, "Oh yeah, don't worry about it"? But they landed, and sidebar, if you're involved in politics in Illinois, chances are you have risked your life in a small plane. And our former Senator Alan J. Dixon wrote a very nice autobiography, and he has some harrowing tales in there about traveling around Illinois in small planes, landing on highways, landing in cornfields and snowstorms. Because, if you're a statewide official, we always had the state plane. Now, Governor Rauner got rid of that, and it's too bad because there are a lot of people in Chicago that need to go to Springfield every day. And nowadays, they're probably spending more on travel reimbursements than they did when they had the state plane and they'd load up the Supreme Court justices and the agency chiefs and the legislature and whatever and bring them down to Springfield and take them back. But in any event, if you're not a state elected official, if you're a senator, for instance, you don't have any way to get around, and you have to depend on. Now, when I worked for Senator Simon, 2 pilots, 2 engines. That was a rule. Cost us a little more, but that's the way he liked to fly. But Alan Dixon would get in anything, and that was kind of Durbin's situation that night. But he gets in, Mondale lands. We welcome him. They have the motorcade down to the Holiday Inn, and we get up early to do this event at the Neisen Farm. And I can tell you, Mondale was brilliant. But, in this day and age of campaigning, Rob, he just was not set up to be able to be effective on television. PBS did a documentary called Campaigning on Cue. And the Buzz and Rosie Neisen Mondale Farm event was a good example that they used. He's run against Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan had a guy named Michael Deaver who did all the media stuff. And Michael Deaver would say, the backdrop is the Statue of Liberty. This is where you stand. You hit your mark. These are your lines you say. And, of course, Reagan was a professional actor. He could nail that. So that was the image that they would get every night during the campaign. Each campaign got their little 90 seconds on the evening news. Well, with Mondale, these guys weren't ignorant. They knew they needed to do the same sort of thing to come across on TV. But in dealing with Mondale, they were dealing with a guy from the old Democratic Farmer Labor Party of Minnesota.
I grew up in the farm towns of southern Minnesota. My dad was a preacher, and my mom was a music teacher. We never had a dime, but we were rich in the values that are important. And I've carried those values with me ever since. They taught me to work hard, to stand on my own, to play by the rules, to tell the truth, to obey the law, to care for others, to love our country, and to cherish our faith.
Old school Hubert Humphrey politician. So they had set this speech up in a machine shed, and they had all these bales of hay for the background. They wanted him to put on a flannel shirt, nobody else in the shot, just the bales of hay, and he's talking about growing up on a farm in Minnesota and what we need to do to revitalize the agricultural economy, which was in the doldrums in the early 80s. Well, Mondale first of all, he won't wear the flannel shirt. He said, hey, I've been a senator, I've been vice president, I wear a suit every day. It would be phony of me to put on a flannel shirt. So he comes out in his nice pinstripe suit. We're all out in the crowd, but in his typical old-style politician way, he says, oh, Roland Burris is here, Illinois State Comptroller. Roland, come on up. Everybody would always want to be in the shot, be on TV. So there's Harris Franklin, the Pike County Chair. Come on up, Harris. By the time he gets done, Rob,
he's
the
lost.
whole idea of going,
he's lost
going
in a group of people. Right.
He could have been in a conference room at the airport. The whole thing, you didn't even know he was on a farm. There was a bunch of guys in suits. And that was a real contrast with Ronald Reagan, who was a very effective campaigner. I used to tell people, if everybody in America was in that machine shed, they could have heard Mondale's sincere, thoughtful views on agriculture and how important it is, and really been swayed. But, all they got was the 90 seconds of here's this guy with a bunch of other guys, and, it just didn't land. But
and as authentic as he was trying to be in that situation, it's not authentic to be in a suit in a machine shed.
Exactly.
It looks completely out of place. The other thing about that election, obviously TV played a part in one of their debates. I know there was a question about Reagan's age, and he really
Reagan came up with a great line on that, which I'm sure he had in advance.
Right. The other thing that got Mondale is he was very honest. And so when he was asked about taxes, he said, well, I'm going to be honest with you. I am going to raise taxes. And he tried to specify that it was going to be on the wealthy. But that was political death for him to say something like that in that environment.
Mr. Reagan will raise taxes, and so will I. He won't tell you. I just did. There's another difference. When he raises taxes, it won't be done fairly. He will sock it to average income families again, and he'll leave his rich friends alone. And I won't stand for it, and neither will you, and neither will the American people.
It really was, and we've seen it many times. When Don Clark Netsch ran against Jim Edgar in 1994, she said, both of us are going to raise taxes. I'm just the one that's telling you the truth. And in fact, Jim Edgar pretty much adopted, after he won, what Don Clark Netsch had proposed, and by way of a tax increase. So, yeah, it's just, you'd think you'd get points for being honest, but it hasn't tended to work that way. But that was, and 84, Illinois was still in play, so we were still one of the states that, you and I were talking earlier about the Electoral College. There's no more than 15 states that will receive any kind of campaign attention.
Right, and that's the high end.
Advertising visits, that's the high. It's probably more like 11. It really is, that are actually in play. And unfortunately for us, Illinois is not one of them. But we have had some great visits. That was 84, 88, again, right before the election. We had Michael Dukakis at the corner of 5th and Main. Huge crowd, which we worked on very hard. There's this whole art to crowd building. And one of the techniques that I learned was tickets. Tickets are free. But if you have tickets and you have multicolored tickets, you can construct a crowd. So you know your stage is at 5th and Main. Who do you want right in front of you? Your most enthusiastic supporters. So they get the blue tickets for the hardcore Democrats. Then maybe you go to schools and fill in your next layer with student tickets, senior citizen tickets. You know, it's a public event. Anybody can come. But if you didn't have a ticket, you were just about it. And, you know, the events at 5th and Main and the Republican friends of mine were at 4th and Hampshire, that far back.
Keep them back there.
And they, well, wait a minute. Well, have you got a ticket?
They're lucky they weren't on Quincy Island, so they shouldn't complain.
Well, it worked rather effectively. And the key point from that visit was Dukakis was getting hammered by George H.W. Bush, you know, the Willie Horton ad. He released a guy on a furlough and he reoffends and whatever. So everybody's urging him to fight back. For a long time, Dukakis did not engage on that, and it hurt him. So they had decided this is where today in Quincy at 5th and Main, Dukakis is going to fight back. Sam Donaldson was one of the lead network anchors at the time. And usually you have a reporter assigned to the campaign, but Sam Donaldson was with him that day. And they arranged, while he's up there speaking, they grab Donaldson and bring him and his camera guy right below the podium. And then Dukakis does the part where he speaks out and objects to all this negative campaigning and challenges Bush. And, of course, then they get that. And that was the lead on that night's news. And it did go over well. I would say for that one, their little 90-second movie that they created with this event was a winner. It was very effective. And even though, again, he didn't win, they won the day that day and had a good press day.
That regardless of who we are or where we come from or how much money we have, each of us counts, and that by working together to create opportunity and a good life for all of us are enriched, not just in economic terms, but as citizens and as human beings.
So that was 88.
Yeah, did you have a chance to actually meet him?
Oh yeah, I was there, and you know it was a crazy day. There was a guy. I'm trying to think of his first name. He was the sheriff of Morgan County in Jacksonville, Henry Jackson. They used to call him Action Jackson, and he was a wild man. And I liked him okay. I was in the Attorney General's office in those days. I had 10 counties, and his was one of them. And so we got along well. But I tried to explain to him, you know, this podium was limited. He wanted to go up on the stage. And I said, you know, they got a list of names, and that's all there is. Plus, he had a gun because he was a sheriff. So he ignored me and tried to take the stage. And, you know, I really felt bad because here's the guy's a respected sheriff over in Jacksonville. Rob, they had him kissing asphalt. You know, he had a gun.
Right.
And he's yelling at him that he's a sheriff and whatever. But, you know, they're
not taking any chances.
Ask those questions later. Yeah, they don't take any chances. So that was a crazy day. But, yeah, Dukakis, you know, very thoughtful, sort of a low-key guy, not your typical political hail fellow, well met. But I was impressed with him. I think he would have been a good president, although I ended up agreeing with quite a bit of what George H.W. Bush did as well. You know, he did the Americans with Disability Act, which I had been involved with the Attorney General's office. So anyway, that was 88. 92, all we got was Clinton at the airport, and he did work the crowd. But we have an airport that can accommodate those big planes, not just with the candidate, but again with the press. and the event was actually in Hannibal. And so they had to land at Quincy and motorcade to Hannibal, so we got to see him out there. The significant thing for me was my friend Kirk Hamlin, native of Hamilton, Illinois, graduate of Western Illinois University, has a long career as a political advance person. And in 84, in fact, he'd worked for Mondale. In 88, he worked for Dukakis. Well, in 92, he finally picked a winner.
The real thing that matters is not our yesterdays, but our tomorrows. We want to say to the working people of America, we owe you affordable health care, a good education system, and a growing economic environment, but nothing we can do for you will take up for what you must do for yourself to continue to be more productive every day and every way. We will all have to change. No one can repeal the laws of change, but we're going to make change your friend if you will work hard and play by the rules. I'm tired of seeing people punished for doing that, and they'll be rewarded in our administration.
That turned out to be a wonderful thing for me because he was hired in the White House as an advance person and eventually rose to the post, what they call trip director, who's in charge of all the advance everywhere he goes. And that was a very key factor in us getting the president to visit here in 2000, as well as, having a friend in the White House. And I was mayor, so I was in D.C., several times every year. Oh my gosh, Kirk, this guy, I got to go to lunch in the White House mess, got in the Oval. In those days, they may still do it. They had these West Wing tours after 9 o'clock at night. If you're a senior staff like Kirk, you could take somebody in there and just wander around. And with Clinton, we did that. It was 10 o'clock at night, and there were a lot of people working. And they told us that Clinton was upstairs in the residence helping Chelsea with the homework, and he'd be back down there at 11 o'clock at night working.
Yeah, he was known for that. Late nights. Yeah.
But just having that access in the White House, one of those meetings, Gary Sparks, who was director of administrative services of the city, was with me. And I think maybe we had lunch or something with Kirk, and he said, hey, why don't you guys come back tomorrow and I'll take you down to the store. And so we went back the next day, not knowing really what the store all involved. Kirk's office was in the old executive office building next door, but he took us over to the White House, and there's a lot of subterranean infrastructure at the White House, way more than I'm sure I'll ever know about. But a couple of levels below the main level of the White House, there was a little, just not much bigger than a closet with kind of a Dutch door, and that's the so-called store. If you want something with the presidential seal on it as a souvenir, you can't buy those in Washington. You can buy all sorts of souvenirs, but you can't buy anything with the presidential seal. But this little store is run by the Secret Service. The proceeds go to their Widows and Orphans Fund. And so Kirk thought, maybe I'd want a golf ball to take back home to my boys, the golfers. So I bought a sleeve of golf balls with the presidential seal. I think I got a coffee mug. And Gary Sparks said, oh, this is interesting. Pulls out a wad that would choke a horse and starts buying watches and tie clips and crystal. And I think he had to ship it all back home. He's probably still got all that good stuff. But, Kirk Hamlin would be a great guy to come to Quincy sometime and talk about. Of course, a lot of it you don't talk about. But he advanced everything. I remember him calling me one night, and he said, yeah, I just got back from a little boat cruise. And I said, oh, really? What's going on? He said, well, we're on Martha's Vineyard, and Bill and Hillary went out with James Taylor and Carly Simon, and they're strumming along, and they're out there on the boat with Jackie O and Maurice Templeton. So I thought, oh, and you get in on all that stuff.
Right, that's pretty amazing.
He could write a great book. But, and of course, nowadays they're in season. But Kirk was always very discreet and never mentioned anything. And I remember it's August of 93. We went to St. Louis, and the president was on his way to Denver to greet the Pope. But he stopped in St. Louis to sign the flood relief bill. In fact, he gave me one of the pens he used, which I gave to my friend Gary Sparks, who was so instrumental in fighting the flood. But he made a big deal out of Quincy, and it was wonderful. But later on that day, one of these advanced guys who I knew, and he was kind of abrasive. He'd worked in Illinois politics before. Apparently, when they got to Denver, he didn't know who this person was that was trying to get past the rope line. And it turned out to be the Secretary of State of the Vatican, as a cardinal. And this guy cussed him out. And that night, the Pope had a handwritten note delivered to the president saying the Secretary of State of the Vatican has never been spoken to that way in his life. And they fired this guy on the spot, of course. I heard about it, so I asked Kirk. I said, "Hey, I heard about our buddy." And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, he's not working for it anymore, is he?" He said, "He decided to pursue opportunities in the private sector." And I said, "Kirk, I know what happened," you know. And in fact, it was published in like Esquire magazine or something. But he was so discreet, he wouldn't say anything about that, even to me, who he's known forever. So anyway, having Clinton was great for Quincy because of the connections we had there. And then in 2000, we had maybe the biggest campaign visit we ever put on, which was immediately following the Democratic Convention. Al Gore, Joe Lieberman, his vice presidential candidate, and their wives got on that little excursion boat that Captain Steve runs down in Hannibal. I think they started maybe at the Quad Cities, but they came down the river, stopping at every town and doing a rally and an event. So we had them at Clat Adams Park. It was really hot, huge crowd. And I was so impressed with Tipper Gore because we're working that rope line. And Gene Simon, longtime president of Chaddock School, and his wife Peg were in the line. And I'm walking along with Al and Tipper. And I can see them maybe 10 people down the line, and Tipper catches their eye and says, "Oh, Al, there's Steve and Kate's friends." And she had recognized the sign. Now, how many people they see in a day? And there were thousands of people down there. But Gene and Peg Simon were good friends with Steven Spielberg and his wife, Kate Capshaw. Kate Capshaw's grandmother, I believe, was a Good Samaritan, and Peg Simon was maybe a niece. So they would stop here frequently. No one ever knew that. I mean, when I was mayor, I'd get a call from the airport, "Hey, Spielberg's just stopped with his plane," and they'd run in and go visit their friend at Good Samaritan home. And then, that would be like if they were going from LA to New York or whatever. So anyway, pretty amazing that she'd only met them once and was able to recognize them in a crowd after they'd been campaigning down the Mississippi River. But that was one where we had thought we were going to get the chance to take Al Gore to the Maid-Rite. They asked me to find a classic Quincy restaurant. So, of course, Maid-Rite was first on the list, where they could take him and campaign while the press went to the Civic Center to file their stories. But as it turned out, the press found out that the next stop was Hannibal. They were supposed to get back on the boat, go to Hannibal, see the same speech they've already seen 5 times that day, and then come up and file their stories. They said, "No, let him go down to Hannibal, make a speech. We're staying in Quincy. We'll file our stories now." So I didn't get the opportunity to take Al Gore to the Maid-Rite, but I can tell you that his staff was very impressed with the Maid-Rite.
Now, did you get an opportunity to meet Al Gore personally?
Yes, and I had several times, and great guy, and really smart, and I think he was on this climate change before any of us, and we all should have been listening, and we should have started working on that 20 years ago. But I was very impressed with Al Gore, and I thought he would have made really a great president.
Our children should not have to draw the breath of life in cities awash in pollution. When they come in from playing on a hot summer afternoon, every child in America, anywhere in America, ought to be able to turn on the faucet and get a glass of safe, clean drinking water. On the issue of the environment, I've never given up, and I never will.
someday I'll do the podcast about Antonin Scalia, who I thought was a proponent of judicial restraint, but decided to have the Supreme Court sort of decide the Florida election without the Florida authorities, which is traditionally not how it's done in this country. Each state gets to determine their own electors. So in any event, I'm a little bitter about that, but there is an interesting story about Scalia coming to Quincy, and that'll be another podcast. So 2004, we had a great visit from John Kerry. And I tell you what, Rob, of all the ones, like I said, met Gore, met Clinton, met Carter, met a lot of guys that ran and didn't get nominated. But of all the folks that I've had a chance to spend any significant time with, I've never been more impressed with anybody than John Kerry. And I know he doesn't come across that way, but very down to earth, very thoughtful.
Yeah, he certainly doesn't come across as down to earth, which definitely hurt him in that election. Yes. He seems elitist, and he's educated and smart, and he speaks perfect diction. It's perfect speech.
Yeah, and
that's
he does
just the nature
come from
of
a
it.
privileged background, but I really think he had a good grip. He was here to do a speech at junior high gymnasium. Another crowd building effort. It seemed like that was a Saturday, and there was so much going on in Quincy that day. But we managed to do a good rally. In fact, I got this picture I'm looking at right in front of me, and I don't know how to Photoshop, but I'm at the podium getting ready to introduce John Kerry. Next to Senator Kerry is Lane Evans, who's our congressman at the time. Next, on the other side of Kerry, is Dick Durbin. And then there's this guy with all this hair, Rod Blagojevich. And how am I going to cut him out of this picture?
You gotta leave him, Chuck. You can't take him out. That's another part of the conversation.
You're right. So we then went to Washington Park, because the real purpose of him choosing Quincy for this event was he wanted to challenge George Bush to a series of debates. They thought that would really favor Kerry in contrast to Bush. And so, of course, he went to the site of the Lincoln-Douglas debate, stood in front of the Laredo-Taft relief there, and challenged the president to a debate. I think it took the White House about 8 minutes to reject that challenge, but he got the press. I remember we had some history students down there. It was a really nice day, and at the conclusion, Durbin got in the car to drive back to Springfield. Blago got in his chopper. Lane Evans was going back to Rock Island, so it was just me and John Kerry going back to the airport. And we have a nice visit on the way out. When we got out there, they pulled out on the tarmac, and I'm sort of, thanks a lot for coming and good luck. And he's like, hey, wait a minute. I can't get on that plane for another half hour. They have to load the press, and then they got to put all the catering on there and whatever. We're not scheduled to take off for half an hour. Why don't you let's just visit. So I had this half-hour visit with him, during which his wife called, Teresa Hines Kerry, who was married to Senator John Hines and is the heir to the ketchup fortune. And, you can tell a lot about, even though you only hear one half of the conversation when somebody's talking to their spouse. And he occasionally involved me, because he was telling her how long it was going to take to get back to Pennsylvania. And I was explaining that, Quincy is west of St. Louis. We're way out there. But I was very impressed. And the other thing that really impressed me was when we were at junior high, my son Jake was with me. He's now my law partner. And I introduced him to the senator, and he was talking to Jake in depth. And then Aide came up and said, Senator, we got to do this press availability in this classroom before the speech. So he went off to do that. Jake and I were doing something else. And he came back out and sort of grabbed me, and he said, hey, what happened to Jake? I was just in the middle of talking about law school with him. And I called for Jake, and he sat down with Jake for like another 10 minutes. And that was, there were no press to see that. That wasn't anything for show. That's just a really sincere, good person trying to be a mentor to a young person interested in the law and politics. So I was very impressed with John Kerry.
The high road may be harder. The high road may be harder, but it leads to a better place. And that's why Republicans and Democrats must make this election a contest of big ideas, not small-minded attacks. This is our time to reject the kind of politics calculated to divide race from race, region from region, group from group. Maybe some just see us divided into those red states and blue states, but I see us as one America, red, white, and blue.
Well, there's no question that there are individuals out there who have difficulty projecting that. They have those abilities, but once they get on the campaign trail, or it just seems so packaged, it doesn't come through.
Yeah.
And that would have helped him if he could have done that.
It's a television thing. In 1976, I think it was, Dan Walker was running for re-election against Mike Howlett. And Mike Royko, legendary political columnist in Chicago, wrote this story about how he had gone to a press conference and witnessed it, and then saw exactly the same thing at home on television, and how it was completely different. He said to him, Dan Walker was completely phony, but when he saw him on TV, he came across as the news anchor, very credible. He said he thought Howlett in person was very charming and believable, but on TV he came across as this ward healer, kind of, old school Chicago style politician, which was kind of the perception there. So TV can do that. And, I think back, Rob, you're an historian, you take somebody like James Madison, brilliant man of letters, basically wrote the Bill of Rights. How could he get elected president? He was small. He didn't like to speak. He had a lisp. He's a great man of letters, but to be able to communicate like a Bill Clinton or a Ronald Reagan, there's no way. And unfortunately, in this electronic age of ours, that's disqualifying if you're not able to get it across through TV.
Well, speaking of being able to communicate, that takes us to 2008, and then we have a candidate who can communicate extremely well.
Absolutely.
America, we cannot turn back. Not with so much work to be done. Not with so many children to educate and so many veterans to care for. Not with an economy to fix and cities to rebuild and farms to save. Not with so many families to protect and so many lives to mend. America, we cannot turn back. We cannot walk alone. At this moment, in this election, we must pledge once more to march into the future. Let us keep that promise, that American promise, and in the words of Scripture, hold firmly, without wavering, to the hope that we confess. Thank you. God bless you. And God bless the United States of America.
2008, we were having a flood. And my successor, Mayor Spring, had set up a sandbagging site over at the Civic Center. And so Obama, coming to town during the flood, of course, showed up, grabbed a shovel, filled some sandbags. Of course, the cameras were rolling. But, good guy, really did want to help. It's interesting, Rob. I remember, at that point, it was starting to look like, hey, Barack Obama, who we all knew as a state senator and then running for Senate in 2004, now all of a sudden, not only is he a national figure, this guy's an historical figure. He's going to become the first African-American president. So when he handed that shovel back, the guy he handed it to was like, I think I'll hang on to the shovel. Would you like to have an axe that Abe Lincoln used to, split a rail or something? So, and also we were having a meeting, and he got a call, and he had to go into the next room, and somebody gave him a pen, and he needed some paper, and he made all these notes. And I said to John Sullivan, our state senator at the time, who's of course a longtime friend of Obama, served in the state Senate with him, and I said, you ought to hang on to that paper. This is all history that we're witnessing here. So that was a good, and then of course he came back at the Civic Center as president. And funny story about that is he had the typical advanced people came in, and I tried to explain to these people, I said, I said, what are you going to do at the airport? We're not going to have anybody at the airport, no reception, no receiving line. And I said, well, wait a minute. He's coming to Quincy. You got to have the mayor. You ought to have Mayor Spring out there, and you ought to have State Senator John Sullivan, who's a good friend of Obama's. Well, they probably heard that everywhere, that, oh, yeah, so-and-so's a good friend with Obama. But he really was. So they ignored me, and they went ahead, and he landed, and he just walked from Air Force One to Marine One, went to a farm in Missouri, and then comes back to the Civic Center. And we had all the Illinois elected officials were there to be introduced with the president. And so, Jesse White and Lisa Madigan and whatever. And they never introduced John Sullivan. So he finishes his speech. He goes to the, I would call it a rope line, but it's really they call them bicycle racks, those metal. But all of us, we were right there on the front row. And so he started shaking hands. And Trish Vineyard, who used to be our assistant superintendent in the Quincy Public School System, is John Sullivan's sister. And she was standing next to me. And Obama turned to her with a smile, and she looked at him with eyes that would just bore right through you and said, I cannot believe you did not introduce my husband, or my brother. And, Obama's president of the United States, not really used to people speaking to him that way. I could tell he was taken aback. He said, well, who's your brother? And she said, John Sullivan. And he said, am I in John Sullivan's district? It just dawned on him. And he said, oh, my God. So he goes back up to the podium, signals for the Secret Service is scrambling. This isn't on the program. The lights and microphone were already off. He signals to get the lights back up, turn the microphone on, goes back. Turned out great for John because he said, hey, I am sorry. I have just committed a grave error here in not introducing my friend, the best guy in the Illinois State Senate. You're lucky to have him, John Sullivan. So John ended up getting lots of exposure out of the deal, but it was an example of poor advance. And when I see an event like when President Trump had that trouble with the ramp at West Point,
right? That's
poor advance. You don't set your candidate up that way. I've seen rostrums that fell over, all sorts of, the whole idea of Trump speaking to 6,200 people in a arena that seats 18,000 in Oklahoma.
Right.
That's poor advance. You don't send your candidate in there. It's always got to be packed, or you've got to control the situation. You set it all up, so it's got to be to the best advantage. And when people say, well, he always gets good press. Well, you know what? Maybe they earned it. Maybe he's got a really good staff that sets everything up and it comes off perfect and you get good press out of it. Because if you get bad press, you probably, it was self-inflicted. And there's a lot to setting up these events, building the crowds. I mentioned that Gore Lieberman, that was 2000. And robocalls had just started then, Rob. And they asked me to do a robocall they had the list of Democratic primary voters, and they figured they could draw from probably about a 12 or 15 county area. So I was on all these calls, and the way these robocalls work, you record two messages. One is a so-called live call if someone answers, and you say, and they can tell obviously it's a recording. But if they don't answer and they had an answering machine, they had a second message that sounded like you were on the call and just missed them. Rob, sorry I missed you, but I wanted to let you know Vice President Gore is going to be in Quincy, and I've got special blue tickets for you, VIP tickets, if you can go by Democratic headquarters that morning, pick them up, and get down to the riverfront. So when I was down there that day, I had dozens and dozens of people come up and say, I know you must be awful busy. You're mayor. Here you are putting on this visit with the vice president and so forth. And yet you took the time to call me and invite me and reserve a ticket for me. And I really appreciate that. Some guy from Havana, Illinois, or Winchester or whatever that I've never heard of thought that I called him. But that was the magic of the robocalls back 20 years ago. I don't think we'd fool anybody today.
I met President Obama one time. It was actually when he was the senator, and I was teaching at West Pike, and I heard that he was going to be in Pittsfield, and it was going and it was going to be later in the day.
I was there that day.
Oh, you were there that day? So I went over there. I left. I'm surprised I didn't run into you, but I left school and I went over there, and it was they had a little community center there, and there's probably 50 people there, maybe 75. Yeah. And then there were so few people there that you could actually talk to him. And so I talked to him probably for 10 minutes. And, he was real affable and nice. That one thing I remember about that event is they give him some pretty tough questions, some religious questions, and he handled those expertly. And that's what I remember about that event. But that's the one time I got to meet him. I know he'd been to Quincy on a number of occasions.
They're really good at answering hard questions. They like that. They welcome it because they've got a response and they can turn it around. But, I remember that day in that building in Pittsfield. And, of course, he was a senator at the time, wasn't president, but still, we probably should mark that Barack Obama spoke there. I remember one day when John Sullivan was running for, might have been re-election, I suppose. But anyway, Obama came in on his behalf, and we had an event down at the Frederick Ball Community Center. And I remember lining up all these kids, and they had no idea who Barack Obama was at the time. But I'm sure now, they would all like to say they got their picture taken with President Obama. And we should probably have something down there or maybe at the Civic Center. You and I have talked about this before because Rutherford Hayes spoke in Quincy as president. So did William McKinley. So did Theodore Roosevelt, in addition to Clinton and Obama. And we probably should memorialize that with a small plaque or something at those various locations, most of which are clustered downtown right around where we have so many of our other historic sites.
I'll see if I can't do something at the Historical Society. I think we can gain some
people at the Historical Society. Yeah.
Just a couple. I think that's right in our wheelhouse, though. I think we could do something like that.
Yeah, good.
And the last question I have for you today is, since we have a presidential election now, have you met either one of the candidates that are running now? Have you met Joe Biden or President Trump?
I have met Joe Biden. I've never met Donald Trump. In '88, I was very active in Senator Paul Simon's presidential campaign. And one of our rivals was that young senator from Delaware, Joe Biden. Not too many people probably remember that he was a viable candidate in 1988. Of course, there were a lot of candidates, and Dukakis ended up with the most money and organization. But early on, Simon, Gephardt, certainly Biden, all seemed viable. But no, I've not met President Trump. Don't anticipate that I will. But I would love to have President Biden come to Quincy next year. Wouldn't that be nice?
That'd be pretty nice. Thank you once again, Chuck, for reliving your stories about the presidential campaigns and candidates made their way through the Gem City. Remember to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast. It's on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google Podcast, iHeartRadio, and a host of others. The music was provided by the band Bones Fork, who has new music coming out soon. We're looking forward to that. You can get their current music pretty much wherever you download music. And remember to join us again next time when we talk, think, and drink on History A Go-Go.
And I'm making my way around the room, and suddenly I hear this voice cry out behind me. Fired up! And I'm startled, and I don't know what's going on. But everybody in the room, this is a small room, they act like this is normal. And when the voice says fired up, they all say ready to go. And so once again, I hear the voice, fired up. They say fired up. They say ready to go, ready to go. And so I look around, I turn behind me, there's this small woman. She's about 60 years old. Looks like she just came from church. She got a big church hat. And she's looking at me, kind of peering at me, and she's grinning, smiling, looking happy. Turns out she's a city councilwoman from Greenwood who also moonlights as a private detective. I'm not making this up. This is true. And it turns out she's famous throughout the area when she goes to football games and when she goes to rallies and she goes to community events, she does this chant of hers. She does it wherever she goes. So for the next few minutes, she just keeps on saying, fired up. And everybody says, fired up. And she says, ready to go. And everybody says, ready to go. And I'm thinking, you know, this woman is showing me up. This is my meeting. I'm running for president. And she's dominating the room. And I look at my staff, and they just shrug their shoulders. They don't know what to do. So this goes on for a few minutes. Now, here's the thing, Iowa. After a few minutes, I'm feeling kind of fired up. I'm feeling like I'm ready to go. So I start joining in the chant. My staff starts joining in the chant. Suddenly, I feel pretty good. And we go on to talk about the lives of the people in the room and their families and their struggles and their hopes for their kids and their grandkids. And we drive out, and it's still raining, but it doesn't seem so bad. And we go to our next stop, and for the rest of the day, even after we left Greenwood, even though we still weren't getting any big crowds anyplace, even though people still couldn't pronounce my name, I felt good. And I'd see my staff, and I'd say, are you fired up? They'd say, we're fired up. They'd say, are you ready to go? And they'd say, we're ready to go.
Yeah, it's time to go home.